I've had like more of a run of something and I didn't. It was same thing with X Factor. I just brought back home and some of my X
Nice.
stuff. But and this is the thing that's pretty impressive is the New Mutants. I had everything. I had
Ooh.
everything. I had like the whole run of them. I also had the graphic novel. I don't know if we talked about the
Yes, we
yeah, we
brought it
talked
up.
about
Yeah.
that. I have like specials. Like I don't know. I can't remember if I had like bought a whole run or like I must have done something like that. I must have maybe got like a whole run of them or
Oh yeah,
it's
yeah.
I'm not sure exactly. I can't remember. Some of that stuff just isn't coming back to me memory wise. But um, because I have the whole run, I can actually start reading it because it really bothers me to have a whole like a like holes in my run. So I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to read it until I know I've got the full series. So yeah, so this is I've been rereading the New Mutants and it still holds up. I mean, it's Chris Claremont, Chris Claremont, and Bob McLeod, and like just did I tell you the story of uh, the whole how Bob was my mentor? Do we have that as a story?
Yes, this has come up. I don't know how much detail you went into, but I do remember it. Here, I'm
Um,
gonna bring up a shot of the book. So this is on Amazon. So if you have a local comic shop, go find this there. But this is just sort of what Google brought up for me.
yeah, I think that's an older version. Yeah, the graphic novel. Um, yeah, Bob and Chris they had created this one of the earlier graphic novels, the New Mutants, and then Bob worked on the first I don't know however many early issues with Chris Claremont,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then how Bob is my mentor. I'll talk about in a moment, but I guess I should start drawing something. So
Oh
what
yeah.
am I doing?
um, you know what? We've got Deadpool and Wolverine that's come out. We've got X-Men that's come out. Um, pick your favorite X. You know what? You've mentioned you've brought up your run, so pick your favorite X-Men and have at her.
Okay, so maybe I'll draw. Um, let's see. I can do.
Like while you
I'll
start
just
that, like on the end of runs where yeah you'll have like a one shot because maybe the main team, the main artist needed a break that week or whatever, or they had something else that came up, or sometimes it's two. Um, because of the way like currently pull lists work, I usually for Batman anyway, like Batman and Detective are on my pull list. I never miss an issue. I haven't since 2011. Um, but I feel weird about those one or two issue arcs because sometimes and unfortunately I find it often I don't love them because it definitely comes up and it feels like someone went, the main team on the book who's written 12 issues or 24 issues worth and is the artist on it is just going crazy and drawing everything. um it sometimes when they have that one or two issues, it definitely feels like someone was like, I need a break, like
yeah.
give me something else, let me draw a poster. I need a break from this thing. So they get someone in for these two issues. Um, so I often don't find them to be fantastic, and that's probably because it's fairly short notice. The writer all of a sudden goes, it's they approach a writer and an artist and like, hey, do you guys have something like semi prepared that you could like rip off real quick? Um, and then other times I find though that those stories are absolutely killer. There was one for, oh god, is it New 52 or is it Rebirth? I think it's a Rebirth Batman comic, and it's two issues. The art style was like totally off the end from what the main artist was doing on the book at the time, but it was like a pure investigation piece. There was some fighting in it, obviously, but like it starts with Batman in a field where this guy is just there who couldn't possibly be there because of what's on him. Then it just sort of explores that event, and I love that one. But yeah, the 1 or 2 issue arcs make me weary. Another big thing that makes me weary is anytime I see a book, especially from the big two, but anytime I see any book with like 6 or 7 names on the cover, I'm always like, that feels like a lot of cooks in the kitchen, you know? I don't know if there's the
Mhm.
focus on it. Um, Not to bash any books because I haven't read it, so let me start with saying that. But the book that's come out Wednesday called Hello Darkness, how it's got like, I think it's 8 huge names right on the cover. It looks cool. The names on it are all names that I've read or in some capacity enjoyed, but at the same time, I'm like, it's a lot of people on like a 24-page comic. I don't know.
Well, there is like something to be said about taking a uh, artist that hasn't worked on the book and being able to put them on the book, and whether that's like a new uh, artist or somebody who has worked, like they've been working at DC, now they come over to Marvel or
Hmm.
something of that nature. Like, I guess it's weird because on the one hand, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but on the other, there's like if there were like test out books that Marvel put out, like Marvel
Yep.
Comics Presents, right, or Marvel 2-in-1 or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, where you'd have like an artist team that would just be on an arc of like this anthology series, I guess, right? And that's how you're able to find like new exciting creators because you're like,
Yeah.
ooh, this is really cool. I really like this artist and I want to see them more, right? So then you try to see if you can find any of the stuff they've done before, try to find, like if they've worked for the company before, what they're working on now. And um, so, yeah, like I guess it's kind of like if you have some kind of ownership over the storyline and you're just like, I'm excited to continue this storyline. And all of a sudden you're throwing an artist in that's like kind of throwing me out,
Yeah. It's
right?
like,
But yeah, if it's something where we don't have like I guess a lot of ownership over, you're just then it's kind of exciting to be able to read some of these anthology books that have come out.
yeah.
Marvel Comics presents, Dark Horse presents. I can't think of anything for DC off the top of my head. I mean, any of the Elseworld stuff, I guess they do.
Yeah.
But
Technically.
yeah, like either way, it's just. Uh, I know what you mean. I do know what you mean, and that's yeah, and I think that's a bit of the conceit for me when I was a younger person, um, reading a book and thinking, "Oh, this is not a good artist," and I mean, and we're talking about classic artists today that probably you just needed a bit more time to get seasoned, get a little bit more
Hmm.
experience under their belt. So there was their just beginning story, and then they were later on down the line they became these just classic amazing creators that I love today, right?
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
and that's kind of so now I'm looking back at some of these books where I didn't get the full run. I'm kind of okay if it's like some kind of fill-in artist because it's exciting now because I'd be like, ooh, this artist now they're doing this, and I get to see some of their earlier stuff and get to compare, how they started and some of the way that they with the skill set they had back then as compared to what they're doing now.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, 100%. Like it's interesting too. Like, um, while I was working at Nowhere, I had a gentleman come in and he's asking for recommendations because he's into anime and manga, but he wants to try comics. And then he's also asking for his partner who also sort of in that same stream. And we were talking about like what makes a good comic artist. So I told him like, hey, to be fair, I am kind of oddly educated, but also perhaps biased in this because I do Wednesday night reviews. I talk to people like yourself all the time about art. Um, and this guy was really into Wolverine, and we brought up the fact that Frank Miller, for instance, like when you want to talk about like art and whether it's good or not, or developing it over time, um, we sort of bounced around Frank Miller because let me see if I can briefly show the cover I'm after. There we go. So I'm gonna add this to the stage real quick. So the cover of Marvel Comics Wolverine #1 from 1982, very famous Frank Miller cover, absolutely awesome. The version of Frank Miller who drew this is not the version of Frank Miller who drew Dark Knight Returns, uh,
Mhm.
Dark Knight 3, the Master Race, or like 300 even, right? Like I find it fascinating how over time art changes, like the even individually, right? Like even your art over
Oh yeah.
the last, I'm sure, year, or heck, yeah, even just a year. If I were to look at drawings from a year ago from yourself to now, there's probably a distinct difference. And yet, like, look at someone who's had a 50-year career, it would just be even more manageable and like, visible. And I find that fascinating, like how that each individual artist changes, let alone what's popular and what's not, and who's good.
So I think there's different. So I think it depends on how highly skilled a comic book creator is, right? So Frank Miller, he is, like kind of figured a lot of the storytelling out earlier on, right? Or at least in the at the peak of his career. I guess maybe if I don't know if peak is the right word, but like when he is more well known for coming out with classic books in
Yeah.
late 80s, 90s, early aughts, that kind of thing. And the I think that some of these creators, to keep themselves engaged, they're constantly trying to play around with how can they minimalize things, how can they tell a story in a way that they haven't done it before. So I don't know if it's so much about pleasing the audience as much as it's about keeping the artist engaged. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you're trying to please the audience, then you're not liking what you're doing, then why do it, right? So, and then there's artists that so you can see there's some artists you see like a pretty big jump in or big difference in how they draw things, and I think Frank Miller is a good example of that. I've seen some of his newer work, and I can't say that I'm as excited by it
Yeah.
as I was from some of his older stuff. But that's not to say that it's just not my thing as much, right? Yeah, like that kind of stuff. I just that doesn't appeal to me.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, and then there's artists that you can you can see that they some of their skills are developing still in regards to like figuring out anatomy and figuring out rendering and all that kind of stuff, uh, uh, creating shortcuts in regards to environment and things of that
Yeah.
nature. And so, um, like you'll see a huge explosion with some artists in regards to like, when you see they've never worked in color before, and all of a sudden you're seeing them do everything from beginning to end, and it's just you can see the growth of
Yeah.
that creator, right? I feel like I'm a little bit more in my skill sets are still developing in the medium range. Like
Mm-hmm.
I I'm not saying I'm not a beginner, and I'm not like a super advanced artist like a Frank Miller. I'm somewhere in the middle. And so, like I think when I look at my work, that I can see that there's an improvement every time I do something new, but I don't know if the reader can see it as much. It's maybe more um, techniques I'm doing that are that are just working a little bit better. So it's
Yeah.
improving a little bit better, It may improve my time. It may improve my just the how I'm keeping myself engaged. Uh, it may be a little bit improvement in regards to technique and skill. So, because I look back at some of my earlier stuff and I still go, well, that's pretty solid drawing, and it doesn't look that much more advanced than what I do today. But then I look at my newer work and I think there's more of that in the book. So maybe there was one thing years ago that I was like, that was really pretty well drawn, and everything else is okay. And now I'm kind of at a point where most of it's pretty well drawn compared to where it was like 5 years ago. And then there's a couple of really good things that I've done this time that I would let you know. So there's, I think, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that every artist kind of goes through the journey at their own speed, and every artist is like, you look at like Eric Larson, and I think that his work is kind of similar to the Jack Kirby's, the Steve Ditko's, where you look at it and you go, when I first used to look at his stuff, and I think I've said this story where I was in line and when I was 13 at a comic book convention in New York, and all the Marvel guys who went on to go to Image were doing signings, and I said to Eric Larson, like, "You're not my favorite, but you're pretty good," or something. Like, it was just a horrible thing to say, and his response was very like, "Okay, thank you." Like,
Yeah.
seeing a 13-year-old kid in front of him, what is he going to do, right? But I think that I really appreciate what his work is like now, because it's been, I think I'm 100% he's improved, but I just look at, he had a really set kind of way of drawing, and he's kind of held on to it, and it's but he's created these really great shorthand for the symbology he creates, that I just think is really super dynamic, and just how consistently good he is, and that's, I think, I haven't really looked at his work too much recently. I haven't really followed his work too much, if I had to be honest, for a while. But I see, every once in a while I see what he's doing, and I go, that looks really great, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I can say that when I first saw his work and when I look at his work today, that I'm like, it looks like two different artists. Whereas that's not some artists, you can see it's almost like a completely different artist today, even though what they were doing was pretty good back then. I still see Eric Larson very solidly, right? And I think that, but there's something very, he's just been just a great work, like a draftsman in regards to the way he works and stuff, right? And then there's like artists that like Mike Mignola, his work has changed quite a bit from his early days, right? Like, it was still really solid work. Some of his, like if you look at his, what was it, Farfur and the Mouse, or whatever it is, and you look at Cosmic Odyssey, and some of his like DC stuff. He did the Wolverine in the Jungle in the early '90s. Like, some of the stuff he did before Hellboy, I thought it was just really beautiful to look at. But and then all of a sudden he started doing Hellboy, and he had this like vision of what how to lay down composition, and he started really developing it within Hellboy, and that became just this beautiful, like, he's just a masterclass in regards to light and dark and composition and stuff. Like, there's some artists that really they really I think they've got things down solidly, but then they decide that they're going to experiment in a way that just gets them, I don't know, just advances them to such an amazing degree.
So to talk about advancement and trying different things and learning and how to do that, our wonderful friend Paul Kemps commented, Bob McLeod is a great artist. Looking forward to hearing your story, Keith. Thanks for doing another sketchy show, Konrad. Paul, absolutely. Thank you for tuning in. And when ready, Keith, take it away.
Yeah, let me actually, I'm going to get a prop. Give me a moment.
Oh boy, I like props. Props are fun.
So I actually had to pull this prop out for this is called Rough Stuff. Bob had created this.
Nice.
It was part of like back issue, which I don't know if it still runs or not. So this was in the early to mid aughts. No, the mid aughts when this came out, but back issue had been out for a while before that. I was living in Japan, and I was wanting to continue my comic book journey, I guess. Like I try to remember if I talked about how I came to Toronto and decided I was going to be a comic book artist. It was like over 20 years ago.
So I do remember the story of you being in Japan, teaching, and sort of getting to draw there very frequently, and that being very inspiring. Some of the connections you made along the way. I never heard you coming to Toronto to be a comic artist, though. So
Well,
please
so
do.
if I back up a little bit, I don't want to make this too long, but essentially, I'd moved from Florida to Toronto, and I was a graphic artist in Florida. Moved to Toronto, and I decided to do the thing I really wanted to do, which is be a comic book creator.
Hell yeah.
I met Sam Agro through this back in the day. Fan Expo was called Hobby Star. I had gone to the comic book Hobby Star convention in 2001. I saw this flyer for a comic book club. I was like, well, this is a great way for me to meet people in the comic book community. And I joined it, and that's where I met Sam Agro, Marvin Law, a couple other people. And anyway, when I was living in Toronto in these early years, I was really, really just jumping into the comic book scene. I was creating like comic book anthology stuff with Sam and the group that we're part of. I joined a studio. It was called Bright Anvil Studio. And this is where you had people like, well, it was Marvin Law introduced me there. Craig Young was there. He got his, he was a teacher there. Marvin Law was a teacher there. Valentino D'Aleandro was there. Mike Del Mundo and I were like, we were cohorts together, right?
Wow.
So anyway, there's a bunch of people that are, you know, pretty well known at this point. Anyway, I got this opportunity to go to Japan, but I'm in the middle of like potentially, you know, I was part of the studio that was, you know, doing some really cool things. So I was a bit torn, but I really wanted to go to Japan. I really, you know, my girlfriend, wife now, you know, it was just something that we had talked about traveling together. And so I thought this would be an opportunity. You know, I can do comics anywhere, but you know, like going to Japan
Yeah.
was like, it's a once in a lifetime experience. So I thought ultimately that's what I decided. But while I was in Japan, I was like, I want to keep on, keep my skill sets going, keep learning, keep trying to create comics. And so, because I wasn't at a studio anymore, I figured maybe I should take like a comic book correspondence class or something just to keep on getting some education that I was getting at the Bright Anvil studio going, keep that going.
Okay.
So I took Bob's, I'm not sure how I was probably because I was reading he had had another comic magazine called Draw. He was, I think he was part of that. And so I'd been reading that, and I think there was an advertisement to say that Rough Stuff was going to be, he was going to do his, you know, Rough Stuff, which is essentially like talking about creators, how they started, and they're showing their, you know, portfolios and stuff.
Oh, that's a good name.
And yeah, so you look at, you know, the cover, you know, it's essentially talking about, you know, was it Bruce Timm, but it had like, yeah, all different like just layouts from, you know, artists, well-known artists, how, you know, which is something I was really interested in, learning their process and stuff. Anyway, so there was the Draw magazine. I think that's how I learned about Bob's correspondence class. So I started taking it with him, and I, was drawing, like Fantastic Four, sequentials just to practice, and he was critiquing them, and like it wasn't easy. It was quite, like he was giving me some really good direction, but obviously it's hard to sometimes get that kind of stuff. But he asked if I wanted to enter my critique, the pages in the critique, into the first issue of this Rough Stuff magazine. And
Oh.
so I said, yeah, sure. So this is back, I think, in 2005 or 2006. And so I'm in the first, let's see if I can, yep, here we go. It's hard to kind of see it, but this is my work, the Fantastic Four stuff that he ended up critiquing in the magazine. And
Wow.
and so, like through the years, I think I corresponded with him a bit, as continued to correspond with him. And then I finally got to meet him in person back in May in Philly for the Fan Expo there. And he knew who I was, and we talked
that's
about,
so cool.
we talked about, the being the first one in the magazine and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, I guess I've always really loved anything that Bob's done, and not even knowing him personally, when I was reading New Mutants, I've always enjoyed his work, and and then it was really great. That's why I took that opportunity to take his class, because I always liked his work, his inking, and his storytelling, and penciling and stuff like that. So anyway, so that's why I kind of call Bob my mentor.
No, that's absolutely. I mean, he put the feedback he gave you and the work you did in one of the first magazines. That's pretty wild. I was curious though, Keith, because that sort of got my brain ticking with everything else that you do. Because for the folks out there tuning in, whether you're watching now with us live, thank you, or sometime in the future, also thank you. Keith does offer a variety of courses in creating comics, illustrations, sketching. So yeah, check out all of the links that Keith has. There's some of them down below. But I am curious, Keith, given that experience and having your work that was critiqued in print like that, when you're sort of starting out, do you think that experience is a part of why that you like to teach, or at least in some capacity be involved with the education of comics?
I mean, I think there's part of it there for sure. He was very kind, and giving him his time, and I understood that he was really imparting upon me some skills that I've to this day still use. And then I also went to a school called Max the Mutt, where I had teachers like Ty Templeton and Richard Pace, Dave Ross, and again, they continue to pass on their skills, and skills that I'm still using to this day. So yeah, I do for sure want to be able to continue to pass that on to the next generation, and then any of the skills I've developed outside of the people that have taught me, be able to pass that on as well, right? So I think there is something to it. I don't know if it wasn't like something that when that happened I was like, someday I'm going to be a teacher as well. I just think that it's a kind of natural evolution, organic thing, that you realize that some people like to be able to pass on, so they have some kind of legacy that they can, the people that they've helped will keep on doing what you were doing, and keep on passing that on, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it just strengthens the comic book community and the artistic community at large, right?
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that, Keith.
Yeah.
I mean that so much. Um, One thing you know what, I've got to ask him though, because you've been a part of it far more than I've ever had the chance to, because time. Um, you mentioned Ken Lashley,
No,
and
not Ken Lashley. I've never.
oh,
No,
okay,
I'm just saying I've never had any interactions with Ken other than just peripherally. I've met him, but
okay,
I mean, I think he's a great artist. He's never been my teacher. So
okay, because yeah, like he's come up a number of times. So I've always been curious about like what the vibe was like when it comes to those sort of the way he taught. But if you've never been there, that's a okay too.
yeah,
Um,
I don't know where Ken Lashley does teach.
I'm not sure if he does. I just knew that he did. Um, and then
Hmm.
yeah, he appears at cons all the time, and I'm sure he's wonderful. And well, I mean, he has been when I've met him. But I'm sure he's great at giving feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about Ty Templeton or Richard
That's the
Pace
one.
or Dave Ross. Like they were all my teachers. Well over a decade ago now, as well as Bob. I mean, um, they were. I mean, Ty was great for really helping me with storytelling. Like he is just a master at breaking down how to tell a story, and I just still use his formula to this day. It's really one of those things that you know. Even though you can break it, I still use a lot.
Hmm.
I still use it, and I pass that on to people too. Yeah. So
Interesting. Like, because again, like comics is such a flexible medium, I find, and there's so many ways to approach it. Because unlike a standard prose book, right, just printed words, you do have all the images, and then the way that you address the the words that appear on the page, whether it's speech bubbles, thought bubbles, some sort of narrator, and all the different graphic ways that you can use to make those distinctive or have multiple narrators. Um, I've always been curious from like the creator's perspective, and I love hearing about it. Um, what's it like working in that sort of hyper flexible medium where you can do basically anything you want compared to like more traditional um, mediums or say projects even where it's like graphic design for a toy or something like that, which is more straightforward.
well, I mean, when it comes to comic books, I mean, without being religious, you're the god, you're the world builder, right? Like, I mean, obviously, it depends on whether you're the solo person on the project or whether you're part of a group. But either way, you're the if you're working in animation, if you're working in the movie industry, or you're working in a toy industry or something, you're a much smaller cog in the machinery of this thing that's being created. Comics, you're much more direct. There's much more of your voice that's there, that
Mm-hmm.
affects somebody directly. You buy a toy, you have no idea that like you don't really know who did the toy design or the packaging design.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that kind of same thing. Animation, you if you stay to the end credits, maybe you'll learn about the thousands upon thousands of people that took part in that creation. A comic book, you're looking at what, five, six people at the most that may have
Yeah.
taken part of it. It's like a band, right? It's like a music band that when you're on you watching this band on stage, you can see all of them playing the instruments, and so you're getting this real visceral connection to them. And then they're creating this whole thing that's more than the sum of its parts. And so
Absolutely.
there's that connection, I think, with the comic book as well. Like you get to, the names are there. You're getting to see you can see the input of that person pretty directly, I think, right? The letterer, the colorist,
Yep.
the inker, the penciler, the editor. Editor may be a little bit more of the behind the scenes, but I mean, uh, generally you get a sense that the editor is making sure everything's spelled correctly and story is, continuity of the story and all that kind of stuff, right? So you're kind of really getting a sense of the people. And that, I think, if you're somebody who wants to learn, who wants to be able to have a little bit more of a direct effect on people, that is, I think, why it's very empowering to be part of something like that. I think to tell your own story in a way that you have a really direct part in telling it. Whereas animation, like, again, it's just a small little part, and it's something to be proud of for sure, but it's just something that most people wouldn't really connect you with, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's one of those things where, especially in animated films, but even regular films, my partner and I have a sort of tradition or habit, I guess, of staying all the way through the credits.
Mm,
I don't know why. Like one of the first times me and her ever went to see a film, way back in the day, the film had ended and they started playing credits, and I went to get up and she's like, "Where are you going?" And I was like, "I was gonna." And she said, "No, we gotta watch the credits. All these people worked on this. We have to watch
yeah,
this." And I was like, "Okay," and that became a thing we do like every movie. Um, and yeah, I will definitely say, like, whether it's a full-on film, a feature, if you will, a cartoon show, 30 minutes or whatever. Yeah, the level of animation and stuff that goes into it is so massive that, like, I can't name any of the animators who helped bring some of my favorite films to life. For instance, like Ghost in the Shell. No
right.
clue. Um, the show The Dragon Prince, which is on Netflix, the new season just came out, and I'm really pumped about it. I don't know. But like you said, like as a comic book artist, when you create a book like that, people know your name. Like I know Tony Daniel, George Jimenez, Todd McFarlane, Mike McGill. I know those names because I've
Yeah,
seen that style and I go, that's who that is. I know Keith Grachow as well. Yeah, it's interesting. I love that perspective. So Keith, talking about perspective, tell me about your piece. What are you drawing? Who are you drawing? What's going on?
oh, I was just drawing Cannonball from New Mutants. I think I'm drawing his I'm not sure of his costume exactly in the later issues, but I know he had that like helmet that he wore. Like early on, he just had like the his blonde spiky hair, and then just the New Mutant costume that they started to individuate later down in the series. So this is my version of that. So whatever that is, I can't remember if he had like a jacket as well or something. But I just really thought, I always thought the way that they did like his the energy that he produces to create his invincibility as he's flying. I always
Yeah,
thought that was really a cool rendering effect. Yeah,
like
there you
the
go. So I just thought it'd be fun to draw that because he's got this cool like energy, and then he's also got like the smoke billowing
mm-hmm.
behind him, right? So but yeah, so that's I don't know if I have any
Right on.
particular like his character per se. I can't say he was like my favorite character, but I just always liked the way he was rendered. I mean, a lot of them were pretty cool. Sunspot was pretty cool as well, and the way they did Karma with her possession of people, the way that they did that in the comics was really cool. So yeah, some of the earlier techniques in regards to how did they create these effects with the limited color palette that they had, the ink that they had to use. Um, sometimes it worked really well, and sometimes it kind of, you can tell the plates that printed the comic pages.
Yeah.
Just the separations just look really bad. So, but I did like some of the things they were trying with these characters, and I thought were pretty innovative at the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like I'm going, trying to find a good image of it that's gonna like be large enough when I show.
So
That's
Karma had like, she was like this Vietnamese woman, and she would have like, here I'll actually, I can just create this kind of really cool effect around her head, and then the possession of the person would also get it. And it was like open lined, something like something like this. It was not quite like this, but something like this. That was the person she's trying to possess would also get this, and they didn't. I thought it was really cool. Is it was an open. It didn't have like a that the structure of possession didn't actually have like a they didn't think it was necessary to do this.
yeah, to give it a border. Now,
Yeah.
Keith, I have to ask Keith. I'm so curious because this is gonna be really cool. When is the last time that you looked at the cover or the books that she's in? Like
Oh,
random.
I've been reading them.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say because, uh, yeah,
Yeah.
like I love it, and I think that's such a interesting way to do that. And like you said, because they've not given it a hard border, whereas like with Cannonball, there's a hard border.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, to just let it be color, just let it exist. That's so cool. Like yeah, like I like ideas that when artists sort of push and go, we could do this, but like just let it do its thing. I
Yeah.
think it's wicked.
Yeah. And I don't know if that was done because of like the like the limitations of their printing in the day. They may have. It's something I'll have to actually ask Bob because I didn't. I hadn't started rereading this series until after I saw him. So if I see him again, I mean, if I had to be honest, I wasn't like geeking out on him and asking him all these questions. That we were just talking about life. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, if he's open to having that conversation, I'd like to know what some of the reasons why he decided to do that kind of stuff in the way he did. But yeah, it's fun to kind of look back and study some of these comic books and figure out like how they rendered things and use some of them in your own stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Like it's one of the things that fascinates me specifically about like looking at older books too is those print limitations. Not so much in like the mentality of like, oh, what if we lost because they couldn't figure out how to print it, boo hoo, but like what kind of interesting and creative ways did artists have to, or rather, I guess, what walls did artists hit when it came to here's what I've drawn and here's what the book looks like in print? Was there a level of communication between them and the printers? How did all that pan out? Because I imagine there's quite a lengthy process to it. When I compare it to older like video games basically that were built to work on tube TVs, because pixel artists back in the day would have these beautiful pixel um, pieces and renders of their characters because they worked on the computer, but they knew in their brains and when it came out, they knew what it would look like on the tube TV. So they could draw something that would look pretty rough, but then when the tube TV kind of filtered it, for lack of a better term, it kind of brushed it and made it look really good. Um, and that's again like a problem with technology not translating perfectly, but they used it. And I'm always
Mm-hmm.
curious, like for the artists that were working in the time of, as we would say, like print deficiencies, what kind of weird, cool effects did they end up doing because of that?
Yeah, well, it's those happy accidents of was a necessity is the mother of invention, right? So whatever. I'm just making up his costume there. I can't remember what the heck it looked like. But yeah, I mean, it's those happy accidents that you uh, discover because you have to. You have no choice but to figure out how to make it work, and you'll. The great thing is you may look through like if you have reference books of artists that have been around for
Mm-hmm.
decades or centuries, and you can go, ooh, I like how they use this painting technique here. Wonder if we can apply it with our or in real life. You may see like this pattern in the clouds, and you go, oh, that would be a really cool way to render the clouds, or whatever it is, so you use life, you use reference from other art, or you just, as I said, sometimes you just like, it's a happy accident. You lay down a line a certain way, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. I didn't mean to do that, but what if I were to do this and then this, and then I was to fill this in, and then change the color, and now it's going to look like the karmas, right? Like, so could have been just playing around, experimenting with different shapes, and then you just kind of go, that feels pretty good, why don't we do that, right? So yeah, it's there's all different ways to do it. If you've been to school as an artist, hopefully you've had teachers that will give you some of these tools to be able to use, or a lot of times the comic book artists of Marvel or DC, they were just interns in an office, and they were around this, and they were they may have just been like filling in flats or whatever they were doing to help do background inks or pencils, or breakdowns of a comic book or something, and then have somebody finish it for them, right? So, but they were around other artists who had learned techniques, right? So, exactly. There's always ways for you to learn it. You just have to be open to it, I guess.
100%. And I just wanted to mention really quick the purple blob you've created, in the air and in the spirit of just sketch, see what happens, go with the flow. That blob to me looks like, from left to right, it could be Wolverine, some sort of barbarian with a giant halberd or axe, Sailor Moon, and then, I don't know, either a really crazy fluffy dog or like Blanca from Street Fighter. Mm-hmm. That's just what I pick out of it.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the things I think we've talked about, the whole idea of doodling, right? Is creating these shapes, and then you can kind of make characters from it that wouldn't have existed otherwise, and hopefully you can use that, you can replicate that down the line, so that you can this is some kind of weird Cerebus kind of like creature now with the 3 heads and pink Cerebus type dog thing. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, there's that's part of that's also using skills you learned as a kid, right? It's doodling, being just using your imagination to create things that you don't really know how to draw. We lose that skill set at some point, so it's always nice to try to bring it back, because it is an actual helpful skill set to be able to open up your imagination through a doodle, and then use that to further your whatever work you're on.
Absolutely. Leo comments Rorschach.
It's the it's the Rorschach, Dad. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Keith, we're a couple minutes early, but you know what? You've completed one drawing. You're working on something or another. It was an absolute blast to get to hang out with you again, talk art history at this point, and just have a good time. Thank you so much, Keith.
Thank you, everybody.
Adios, everyone.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Collector problems, cliffhangers, mysteries. You need answers. When did Batman become Green Lantern? I get it.